In the dusty heart of Texas, there was a job nobody wanted. It was pinned to the general store bulletin board in Cedar Falls, a single sheet of paper slowly turning yellow under the sun. Housekeeper and cook needed. Blackbriar Ranch, good pay, no questions asked. For months, it hung there like a warning, because everyone knew about Wade Langston. They knew about his sprawling ranch, a slice of paradise from a distance, with green pastures and fine horses grazing in the morning mist. But they also knew that up close, Blackbriar Ranch was a graveyard. Wade hadn't smiled in 4 years, not since his wife, Elizabeth, died bringing their son into the world, and that boy, their little Tommy, was taken by a fever before he even turned 3. Grief had hollowed Wade Langston out, leaving a man who was more ghost than human. And so the notice stayed, collecting dust and fly specks, a testament to a pain so deep nobody dared get close to it. Until a woman with nothing left to lose stepped off a merchant's wagon. Her name was Ruthie Bell Carter. She had calloused hands, eyes that had seen too much, and a past that followed her like a shadow. She'd been run out of 2 towns for reasons people only whispered about. When she knocked on Wade Langston's door, she didn't flinch at the darkness in his eyes. She didn't step back from the crushing silence of his home. She was there for the job nobody wanted. But what she would find at Blackbriar Ranch wasn't just a job. It was a secret, buried deep under layers of grief. A secret that was darker and more dangerous than anyone in Cedar Falls could have ever imagined. And uncovering it would either save them both or get them killed. Before we dive into this, I gotta ask where you're watching from. Drop your city or state in the comments below. And if this story grabs you, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because what's coming next, you won't want to miss. The September sun was hot on Ruthie's neck as she stood in the main street of Cedar Falls. The town was little more than a single row of weathered buildings. A general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, a church. It was the kind of place you ended up when you ran out of other places to go. Her worn leather satchel held everything she owned in the world. 2 dresses, a faded photograph of her parents, and the last $3 to her name. She clutched the strap, her knuckles white. "You sure about this, miss?" the merchant who'd given her a ride asked, his face etched with concern. "Blackbriar Ranch. It ain't no place for a woman alone. That Wade Langston, he's got a reputation." "I've heard the stories," Ruthie said, her voice steadier than she felt. "But I need the work, and from the sounds of it, he needs a housekeeper." The merchant just shook his head and clucked his reins, his wagon rolling away in a cloud of dust, leaving her utterly alone. Her eyes found the bulletin board outside the general store, and there it was, the yellowed paper, the faded ink, housekeeper and cook needed. It felt less like an offer and more like a dare. "You thinking about that job?" Ruthie turned. An elderly woman with kind, curious eyes was watching her. Silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her hands, though wrinkled, looked strong. "I'm Sarah Mitchell," the woman said, extending a hand. "I run the seamstress shop. Word travels fast. You're the woman who was asking about the Langston place back in Millerville." Ruthie shook her hand. "I'm Ruthie Bell Carter, and yes, I'm here to take that job, if Mr. Langston will have me." Sarah's expression turned grave. "Child, you know what happened out there, don't you? Grief can twist a soul something fierce. He's not the same man he was. That ranch is beautiful, but it's like a tomb. His only hand, old Pete, says Wade talks more to his horses than to any person." "I know about his wife and son," Ruthie said softly. She knew what it was to be haunted. "This ain't just about grief, honey." Sarah leaned in a little, her voice dropping. "There are other whispers, things that don't add up." Ruthie's brow furrowed. "What kind of things?" "Just be careful. Wade Langston used to have a partner before the war, a man named Silas Morton. They say there was bad blood between them. Morton left town right after Wade came back a hero. Some say he was run off. Now folks are saying Morton's been sniffing around again, buying up land nearby. It's like a storm gathering on the horizon." The warning sent a small chill down Ruthie's spine, but it didn't change a thing. Desperation was a powerful motivator. "I'm not here to stir up trouble," Ruthie said. "I'm here to work." Sarah studied her for a long moment. "You've got your own story, don't you? The kind that makes a woman take a job nobody else wants." Ruthie's jaw tightened. "Don't we all?" A flicker of understanding passed through Sarah's eyes. She sighed. "Well, if you're determined to do this fool thing, you'll need supplies." She led Ruthie into her shop, a cozy space filled with the scent of fabric and thread. She began packing a bag. "Clean aprons," she said. "A good sewing kit. And here." She handed Ruthie a wrapped bundle. "Fresh bread and jam. A man's got to eat, even if he's forgotten how to live." Ruthie was overwhelmed by the kindness. "I can't pay you for this." "Consider it an investment," Sarah said with a wry smile. "Thank me if you're still there come Christmas." The walk to Blackbriar Ranch was long and lonely. The road wound through hills painted gold and amber by the afternoon sun. When she finally crested a hill, the ranch spread out below her, just as beautiful and imposing as the stories claimed. A grand house of stone and dark wood, with a wide porch, corrals, barns, and outbuildings, and in the distance, cattle grazing peacefully. It was a kingdom, a silent, lifeless kingdom. An old, bow-legged man emerged from the barn. This had to be Pete. "You'd be the woman from town," he said, his voice gentle. "Come about the job." "I am. Is Mr. Langston available?" Pete glanced nervously toward the house. "He's in there. But miss, you might want to think twice. He's not been right since it all happened." "Since he lost his family," Ruthie finished for him. "I know." Pete just nodded slowly, his eyes full of a sorrow that seemed as old as the hills. "Well then, I'll be praying for you both." Ruthie walked to the front door. It was solid oak, painted black, the brass knocker tarnished and dull. She took a deep breath, lifted the heavy ring, and let it fall. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound echoed in the unnerving silence. Then, slow, deliberate footsteps from inside. The door creaked open, and she was face to face with Wade Langston. He was taller than she'd expected, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his shirt. His dark hair was going silver at the temples, and his eyes were the color of a gathering storm. He could have been handsome once. Now his face was a mask of grief, carved with lines of pain. "Mr. Langston," she said, her voice firm. "I'm Ruthie Bell Carter. I've come about the job." He studied her, his gaze intense, unreadable. "You know what happened to the last 3 women who took this job?" "They left," Ruthie said simply. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "I won't." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise? Skepticism? He stared at her for a long moment, a silent battle of wills passing between them. Then, without a word, he stepped aside, letting her in. The house was magnificent. High ceilings, polished wood floors, expensive furniture. But it was cold. A thick layer of dust covered everything, and the air was stale, heavy with disuse. The silence was a living thing, pressing in on her. "Kitchen's through there," he grunted, pointing. "Your room is upstairs, second on the left, $30 a month, meals included. You can leave whenever you want. And you can dismiss me any time you want," Ruthie added, meeting his gaze. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It was gone as quickly as it came. "Fair enough." The kitchen was a marvel, with a huge cast-iron stove and a water pump right at the sink. But like the rest of the house, it was a place where life had stopped. The cupboards were stocked, but nothing had been touched in ages. "When did you last have a proper meal?" she asked, her tone direct. He turned, his storm cloud eyes narrowing. "Are you always this direct?" "When it matters," she said. "If I'm to be your cook, I need to know what I'm working with." He was quiet for a long time. Finally he spoke, his voice low and rough. "I eat when I'm hungry, sleep when I'm tired. That's enough." "But is it living?" The question hung in the air between them, sharp and dangerous. His jaw tightened. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. For a terrifying second, she thought he would throw her out right then and there. Instead, he turned away. "I'll show you to your room. You can start tomorrow." As she followed him up the grand, silent staircase, Ruthie touched the small cameo brooch at her collar, her mother's last gift. This was it. She had made her stand. Her room was small and clean, with a window looking out over the ranch. As his footsteps retreated down the hall, she sat on the edge of the bed, the silence of the house wrapping around her like a shroud. She wasn't just here to clean a house. She was here to confront the ghosts. She just didn't realize how many there were, or that some of them were still walking. Ruthie was up before the sun, the habit of a lifetime. The house was still dark, but she could hear the ranch stirring outside. She made her way to the kitchen and in the pre-dawn gloom began to work. She lit the stove, the flare of the match pushing back the shadows. She set coffee to brew, the aroma slowly starting to fight the stale air of the house. In the pantry, she found flour, sugar, salt pork, preserved fruits. Good supplies. Someone, probably Pete, was keeping the place stocked, even if the owner refused to live in it. She would make a proper breakfast, the kind a working man needs, the kind that says, "This is a home." She was kneading biscuit dough when his footsteps echoed on the stairs. Wade appeared in the doorway, already dressed for work. He had washed and shaved. It was a small thing, but it made him look less like a phantom. "Morning," he said, his voice rough. "Good morning, Mr. Langston. Coffee's ready. Breakfast will be done shortly." He poured a cup and stood by the window, watching the sun begin to paint the sky. "You don't need to cook for me. I'm used to making do." "Making do isn't eating well," Ruthie replied, not looking up from her work. She slid a pan of thick-cut bacon onto the stove. The sizzle was a defiant sound in the quiet kitchen. "I've been managing fine on my own." "Have you?" She turned to face him then, her gaze taking in the way his clothes hung on his large frame, the hollows beneath his eyes. "When was the last time you ate 3 meals in one day?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. She scrambled eggs with a bit of cream she'd found, fried the bacon until it was perfect, and pulled the golden brown biscuits from the oven. She set the plate in front of him at the small kitchen table. He stared at it for a long moment. He picked up his fork, then paused. "It's been a long time," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "since someone cooked for me." "Then it's about time someone did." They ate in silence, but it was a different kind of silence. The clink of his fork against the plate was a small victory. When he was finished, he pushed the clean plate away and looked at her, a flicker of something she couldn't name in his eyes. "Thank you," he said. The words sounded foreign on his tongue. After he left, Ruthie began her real work. She threw open the windows on the main floor, letting sunlight and fresh air pour in, chasing out the ghosts of yesterday. She dusted furniture that hadn't been touched in years. In the parlor, she found the first true traces of the family he'd lost. A small, beautifully crafted rocking chair in the corner, a basket that once held toys, and on the mantel, empty spaces in the dust where picture frames used to sit. He had hidden them away, wiped them from sight, but not from memory. The real heart of the sorrow she knew would be upstairs. Wade's room was at the end of the hall, neat and Spartan, but it was the room next to his that drew her. The door was closed. She hesitated for only a second before turning the knob. The air inside was thick, still, like a held breath. It had been a nursery, a crib against one wall, the linens still perfectly made, a changing table, a chest painted with cheerful animals, and on a shelf, a line of picture books. It was a perfect, heartbreaking time capsule of a life cut short. On the windowsill sat a small wooden horse, carved with such care and love it made her throat ache. The flowing mane, the proud neck. It was a masterpiece of a father's love. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the smooth wood. This was Wade's work. She was certain of it. A gift for his son, Tommy. What are you doing in here?" The voice was like a whip crack, cold, sharp, and filled with a fury that was terrifying. Ruthie spun around. Wade was standing in the doorway, his face a mask of thunder. She hadn't heard him approach. "I was cleaning," she said, her voice calm despite the frantic pounding of her heart. "Letting in some light." "This room stays closed," he snarled, each word precise and dangerous. "It doesn't need cleaning. It doesn't need anything." His eyes locked on the wooden horse in her hand. "Put that down." She gently set the horse back on the windowsill, but she didn't leave. "This was your son's room," she said softly. "Don't." The word was strangled, torn from him. "Don't talk about him." "What was his name?" She pushed, knowing she was crossing a line, but feeling she had to. His hands clenched into fists. "I said don't." "He was real, Mr. Langston. He lived in this room. Pretending he never existed won't honor his memory." "You don't know anything about it." His voice was raw now, the careful control shattering. "You don't know what it's like to lose everything that matters." "Don't I?" The question stopped him cold. He stared at her, and for the first time, he truly saw her. Not as a housekeeper, an intruder, but as a person with her own ghosts. The fury in his face faltered, replaced by a wave of raw, bottomless pain. "His name was Thomas," he said, the words seeming to tear him apart. "We called him Tommy. He would have been 5 years old last month." "And your wife?" Ruthie whispered. "Elizabeth." The name was a breath of agony. "She died bringing him into the world, bled to death while I held her hand and promised her everything would be all right." He gave a bitter, broken laugh. "Then the fever came for Tommy, and there was nothing I could do. Nothing. I'm so sorry." "Everyone's sorry," he shot back, the anger returning. "Sorry doesn't bring them back. Sorry doesn't fill the silence." "No," she agreed, her voice gentle but firm. "It doesn't. But you've been grieving for 4 years, and it's eating you alive. You're so afraid of the pain that you've forgotten how to live." "Maybe I don't want to live without them." The terrible confession hung in the air between them. Ruthie took a step closer. She reached out and touched his arm. "They wouldn't want that for you, Wade. Would they? Would your Elizabeth, your Tommy, want you to stop living because they had to?" His face crumpled. The strong, angry man seemed to dissolve, leaving only a broken one behind. He pulled away from her touch, wrestling himself back under control. "Clean the rest of the house," he said, his voice hollow. "But leave this room alone. That's not a request." He turned and left her standing there in the silent, sunlit room. She looked at the little wooden horse on the windowsill. She understood now. Wade wasn't cruel. He was shattered. But as she stood there, a cold thought crept into her mind. The story was simple. Tragic, but simple. A wife lost in childbirth, a son lost to fever. But Sarah Mitchell's words echoed in her ears. There are other whispers, things that don't add up. Standing in that perfect, dusty nursery, Ruthie felt a sudden, chilling certainty. The story wasn't simple at all. The days that followed fell into a tense routine. Wade was distant, polite. Ruthie was patient, respectful of his boundaries. She cleaned, she cooked. She slowly breathed life back into the forgotten corners of the house. But the nursery door remained closed. One afternoon, searching for canning supplies in the deep pantry, her hand brushed against something tucked away on a high shelf. A leather-bound book. She pulled it down. It was a recipe book. The cover was worn, the pages stained with use. On the first page, in elegant, looping script, was an inscription: Elizabeth Langston's Kitchen, with love from Mother, 1859. Ruthie's fingers trembled as she turned the pages. Cornbread, apple pie, pot roast, the simple, hearty meals of a home. But it was more than just recipes. In the margins, Elizabeth's handwriting filled the empty spaces. Add an extra pinch of salt. Wade loves this with extra gravy, Tommy's favorite. He likes it with honey butter. It was a diary of love, told through food, a map to the heart of the family that had lived here. That evening, Ruthie made the cornbread. She followed Elizabeth's notes exactly, even adding the extra pinch of salt. She imagined the young wife standing in this very spot, humming a tune as she mixed the batter. When she set the plate on the table in front of Wade, he stopped, his fork halfway to his mouth. He stared at the golden square of cornbread. "Where did you find this recipe?" he asked, his voice thick. "In the kitchen. I hope you don't mind." He took a bite. He closed his eyes and a tremor went through him, a wave of memory so powerful it was like a physical blow. "She made this," he whispered, "every Sunday. Tommy would eat 3 pieces if we let him." He didn't say anything else. He just ate the cornbread slowly, as if committing each bite to memory. When he was done, he looked at Ruthie, and there was a crack in his armor, a flicker of gratitude. "It tastes exactly the same," he said. "Good recipes are meant to be used," she replied gently. She wouldn't want them gathering dust. In the weeks that followed, something shifted, a fragile truce. He started talking more, not much, but more than grunts. He told her which pastures the cattle preferred, which horse had a tricky temperament. Small things, but they were everything. One day, he came into the kitchen as she was pulling a pie from the oven. An apple pie, from another of Elizabeth's recipes. "That was her specialty," he said, his voice soft. "She won first prize at the county fair with that pie. 2 years running." He paused. "She would have liked you, I think. You're stubborn, like she was." It was the closest he'd come to a compliment, and it warmed Ruthie more than the heat from the stove. But the peace was not to last. A rider came galloping up to the ranch one afternoon, his horse lathered, his face tight with urgency. It was a young hand from a neighboring ranch. "Pete, where's Mr. Langston?" he yelled. Wade emerged from the barn, his face instantly alert. "What is it, Jimmy?" "It's about the Becker place, sir," the young man panted. Silas Morton made an offer on it. Cash money, full asking price. Old man Becker's thinking of selling. The warmth that had begun to seep into Wade's face vanished, replaced by a frozen mask of cold fury. The name dropped into the air like a stone. Silas Morton. "The hell he is," Wade said, his voice a low growl. "Who's Silas Morton?" Ruthie asked quietly, stepping out onto the porch. Wade turned to her, his eyes like chips of ice. "Someone I used to know, someone I thought I'd left behind." He looked back at Jimmy. "Any word on whether Becker's decided?" "Not yet, sir, but Morton's spreading money all over town, making friends. Folks say he's got big plans." After the rider left, Wade stood staring south, towards the Becker property line, his whole body rigid with tension. "He was my friend once," Wade said, almost to himself. "We served together in the war. I saved his life on the battlefield." He let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "Biggest mistake I ever made. He came back here with me. Was my partner in this ranch for a year, before I met Elizabeth." "What happened?" Ruthie asked. "He wanted more than his share. He wanted everything. When I told him no, he showed his true colors. He's a snake, Ruthie. He doesn't just want land. He wants to own people, to crush anything he can't have." "Why now, after all these years?" Wade's gaze was dark, troubled. "I don't know, but if he gets a foothold here, he won't stop with the Becker place. He'll come for this ranch. He'll come for everything." That night, Ruthie couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Morton, about the change in Wade. This wasn't just grief. This was fear. She went back to Elizabeth's recipe book, seeking comfort in the familiar handwriting. As she flipped through the pages, a small folded piece of paper fluttered out from between the pages for beef stew and apple crumble. It wasn't a recipe. It was a letter, in Elizabeth's hand. But it wasn't addressed to Wade. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It was dated just 2 weeks before Tommy was born. "I am so afraid." He was here again today, while Wade was in town. He said his patience is wearing thin. He said if I don't give him what he wants, he will destroy everything Wade has built. He will tell Wade the secret. "I don't know what to do. The money is almost gone. I pray to God that he will just go away, that he will leave us in peace. But I know he won't. A man like that never does. Ruthie's blood ran cold. A man like that. She thought of Silas Morton, the snake, the man who wanted to crush everything. But then she read the last line of the letter, and her heart stopped. I should never have trusted him. I should have told Wade the truth about what happened in St. Louis before I ever met him. I wish I had never laid eyes on my cousin Daniel. Daniel, not Silas. Who in God's name was Daniel? Ruthie sat in the silent kitchen, the letter trembling in her hand. The simple, tragic story of Blackbriar Ranch had just been torn to pieces. This wasn't a story about grief. It was about blackmail. And maybe it was about murder. The letter felt like a hot coal in her hand. Daniel. The name meant nothing to her, but it was the key to everything. Elizabeth was being blackmailed by her own cousin, and she was terrified. Did Wade know? Did he have any idea that his wife was living in fear in the weeks before she died? Ruthie folded the letter carefully and tucked it deep into the pocket of her apron. She couldn't tell him, not yet. Not when he was already on a knife's edge over Silas Morton. To tell him his wife had a secret so dark she was paying to hide it. It would destroy the man he was trying to become again. She had to find out who Daniel was. The next day, she saw her chance. Wade was riding out to the far pastures to check on a section of fence, a job that would take him all day. As soon as he was gone, Ruthie went to work. She told Pete she was doing a deep clean of the house, a fall cleaning. He just nodded, happy to see some life being put back into the place. She started in the master bedroom. It was Wade's room now, but it had been his and Elizabeth's. She searched methodically. The chest of drawers, the wardrobe, under the bed. Nothing. Then she saw the small writing desk in the corner. It was Elizabeth's. It was covered in a thick layer of dust. Wade clearly hadn't touched it since she died. The drawers were filled with stationery, old invitations, household accounts. In the very back of the bottom drawer, her fingers closed around a small leather-bound diary. Elizabeth's diary. Her heart pounded as she opened it. She flipped past the early entries, pages filled with the hopes and dreams of a new bride, the joy of discovering she was pregnant. She went to the dates just before her death. The entries grew shorter, the handwriting more frantic. October 12th. Daniel came again. He smiled that horrible smile of his. He knows we can't afford his demands much longer. Wade works so hard. This ranch is his life. I cannot let that monster take it from him. October 19th. I am so tired. The baby will be here soon. I feel trapped. I saw Silas Morton in town today. He looked at me with such hatred. I know he and Wade are no longer partners, but the way he looks at me, it's like he knows. Does he know about Daniel? Are they working together? Ruthie's breath hitched. Silas Morton and this mysterious cousin, Daniel, connected. She flipped to the last entry. It was dated the day before she went into labor, the day before she died. October 25th. I sold my mother's pearls, the last good thing I had from my family. I gave the money to Daniel. He promised it was the last time. He promised he would leave and never come back. I don't believe him. I have a terrible feeling. Something awful is going to happen. If anything happens to me, I pray someone finds this. Wade must be protected. He must never know the truth of what I was before I met him. He is a good man, the best man. He does not deserve this shame. The diary ended there. Shame. What shame? What secret was so terrible she would sell her inheritance and live in constant fear to protect it? Ruthie stood in the silent, dusty room, the diary in her hand. She had more questions now than answers. Elizabeth wasn't just a victim of a tragic accident. She was a woman cornered, terrified, and keeping a desperate secret. And then a thought, cold and sharp as an icicle, pierced through her confusion. Wade had told her Elizabeth bled to death after giving birth. It was a common enough tragedy. But what if it wasn't? What if something else happened in that room? With a woman that frightened, that stressed? What if her death wasn't just a complication of childbirth? What if her fear killed her? Or what if someone helped it along? She had to talk to someone. Someone who knew Elizabeth. Someone who was there. Sarah Mitchell, the seamstress in town. Ruthie made an excuse to Pete about needing more thread and supplies, and rode one of the gentler mares into Cedar Falls. She found Sarah in her shop, humming as she stitched a hem. "Ruthie, child, it's good to see you. You're still in one piece, then," Sarah greeted her warmly. "I am," Ruthie said, trying to keep her voice even. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, about Elizabeth Langston." Sarah's smile faded. She put down her sewing. "What about her? You knew her well, didn't you?" "As well as anyone. She was a sweet girl, a little quiet, a little haunted, even before the end. Always seemed to be looking over her shoulder." The words sent a chill through Ruthie. "Haunted? By what?" Sarah sighed, looking out the window. "I don't know for sure, but I know this. She was terrified of Silas Morton. After Wade broke off their partnership, Morton stayed in town for a few months. He was cruel. He'd say things to her in the street, quiet things, so no one else could hear. But I saw her face afterwards. She would be white as a sheet. What did he say? I don't know. But I always had the feeling he had some kind of hold over her. And I think it had something to do with her family, back east. She never talked about them. It was strange, like she had cut herself off from her own past. Her own past. The shame she wrote about in her diary. "Sarah," Ruthie began, choosing her words carefully. "Did Elizabeth ever mention a cousin? A man named Daniel?" Sarah's eyes widened in shock. The color drained from her face. "Daniel?" she whispered, the name like a curse. "Daniel Forrester? How in God's name do you know that name?" I found some of her old letters." Sarah sank into a chair, her hands trembling. "Oh, that poor, poor girl. He was no good. The black sheep of the family. He showed up here once, about a year after she was married. Said he was just passing through. Wade was away on a cattle drive. Daniel stayed for 2 days. When Wade got back, Elizabeth told him her cousin had visited and left. But she wasn't the same after that visit. The light went out of her eyes. So Daniel had been to the ranch. He knew the layout. He knew when Wade was away. Sarah, what was the secret? What was the shame Elizabeth was so afraid of?" Sarah looked at Ruthie, her eyes full of pity. "I don't know all of it. Just whispers I heard from a cousin of my own who knew their family in St. Louis. The Forresters were wealthy, respected, but there was a scandal, something to do with Daniel, and a business deal gone wrong. Accusations of theft, of forgery. The family disowned him, but it was rumored that he knew things. Family secrets he used to get what he wanted." Ruthie's mind was racing. Blackmail. It was all true. But there was still a missing piece, the biggest piece of all. Tommy. He died of a fever, months after Elizabeth. It was a separate tragedy, wasn't it? "Sarah," Ruthie asked, her voice low, "the fever that took little Tommy. Do you remember it?" "Of course. It swept through the county that winter. Took 3 children in Cedar Falls alone. A terrible time." "Was there anything unusual about it? At the ranch?" Sarah frowned, thinking. "Now that you mention it, Pete came into town right after the boy passed. He was buying a shovel. A new one. I thought it was odd. He looked spooked. Said they'd found a drifter, dead, not far from their well. Said the man had clearly been sick for a while. Pete figured he'd contaminated the water. He buried the fella himself, way out on the property. Never even told the sheriff. Said he didn't want to cause Wade any more pain, connecting the drifter's sickness to the boys. A sick drifter, found near the well. Or was he just a drifter? Ruthie felt a wave of nausea. A man like Daniel, or Morton, a man who wanted to hurt Wade, to destroy him. Would he be capable of such a monstrous act? Would he intentionally bring sickness to the ranch? To kill the one thing Wade had left to live for? His son? It was unthinkable. But standing there in that quiet shop, Ruthie knew with a horrifying certainty that it was true. Tommy's death wasn't an act of God, it was murder. She rode back to Blackbriar in a daze. The sun was setting, painting the sky in bloody shades of pink and orange. The beautiful, peaceful ranch now felt sinister, tainted. She had to tell Wade. She had to tell him everything. The blackmail, the diary, the conversation with Sarah, the sick drifter by the well. She found him in the barn, brushing down his horse. He looked up as she entered, and for a moment she saw the man he could be. Calm, strong, at peace with his animals. Then he saw her face. "Ruthie, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Wade," she began, her voice shaking. "We need to talk, about Elizabeth, and about Tommy." She told him everything. She pulled out the diary, the hidden letter. Her voice was steady as she recounted the story of blackmail, of a cousin named Daniel, and a past full of shame. She told him what Sarah had said about Morton's cruelty, about Elizabeth's fear. He listened in absolute silence, his face becoming a mask of stone. The blood drained from his face, leaving it pale and taut. He didn't interrupt. He just stood there, absorbing every word, every blow. When she finished with the story of the drifter by the well, the silence that followed was terrifying. It stretched and stretched, thick with unspoken horror. He didn't rage. He didn't break down. He did something far more frightening. He closed his eyes, and a single tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. And then he opened them, and the grief was gone, replaced by something ancient and cold, a killing cold. "I know where he's buried," he said, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "Wade, what are you going to do?" "Pete was trying to protect me," he said, still in that dead voice. "He buried the body, but he told me where, in the north pasture, under the old dead oak." He turned and strode out of the barn, grabbing a lantern and 2 shovels as he went. "Wade, wait!" Ruthie cried, running after him. "You can't just go out there alone. What are you hoping to find?" "Proof," he said, not looking back. The moon was rising as they reached the far north pasture. A single skeletal oak tree stood on a small hill, its bare branches clawing at the night sky. The air was cold, the only sound the chirping of crickets and the frantic beating of Ruthie's own heart. Wade set the lantern down. Its yellow light cast long, dancing shadows. He handed her one of the shovels. "I need you to help me," he said. It wasn't a request. For the next hour, they dug. The work was grueling, the ground hard and rocky. Wade worked with a grim, relentless energy, his muscles straining, his face set like granite. He didn't speak a word. Finally, his shovel hit something that wasn't rock. A dull thud. He knelt, scraping the dirt away with his bare hands. Ruthie held the lantern closer, her heart pounding against her ribs. It was a body, wrapped in a rotting burlap sack. With a deep breath, Wade pulled the burlap away from the corpse's head. The body was decomposed, little more than a skeleton, but some things remained. A scrap of cloth from a shirt collar, a few strands of matted hair, and something else, something that glinted in the lantern light. Around the skeleton's neck, on a tarnished chain, was a small silver locket. Wade's breath hitched. With trembling fingers, he reached down and picked it up. The clasp was rusted shut. He took the tip of his knife and pried it open. Inside, there were 2 tiny, faded portraits. On one side was a formal, unsmiling portrait of a man Ruthie had never seen. He had dark, cruel eyes. Daniel Forrester. It had to be, but it was the other side that made Wade let out a strangled cry, the other side that made Ruthie's blood turn to ice. It wasn't a picture of Elizabeth. It was a picture of a young woman who looked so much like Ruthie they could have been sisters. A young woman with the same determined chin, the same sad eyes. A young woman Ruthie knew all too well. It was her mother. Ruthie stared at the face in the locket, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. Her mother, younger but unmistakably her, next to a man who was almost certainly the blackmailer, Daniel Forrester. How? Why? Who is this? Wade's voice was a raw whisper. He was looking at Ruthie, then back at the locket, his face a canvas of confusion and dawning horror. That's my mother, Ruthie stammered, her own world tilting on its axis. And this man, Daniel Forrester, he's my uncle. The confession hung in the cold night air. Wade staggered back as if she had physically struck him. Your uncle? My mother's brother. He was disowned by the family before I was born. I never met him. He was just a story, a family disgrace we never spoke of. Ruthie's mind was reeling, pieces clicking into place with horrifying speed. Elizabeth Langston. Her maiden name was Forrester. She was Elizabeth Forrester. Your cousin, Wade breathed, the words full of disbelief. Ruthie felt a wave of dizziness. Elizabeth, the woman whose ghost she'd been living with, was her own blood, her family. The shame Elizabeth was so desperate to hide. It was her family's shame. The scandal her mother had refused to ever speak of, and Daniel, her uncle, the man who terrorized her cousin, who likely murdered her and her child, was buried right here at her feet. So you came here, Wade started, his voice hardening, suspicion creeping into his eyes. You knew who she was. This was all a lie. No, Ruthie cried, tears streaming down her face now. No, Wade, I swear to you, I never knew. My mother cut ties with the Forresters completely. She never spoke of them. I didn't even know I had a cousin named Elizabeth. I just saw the job posting. I was desperate. It's the God's honest truth. He stared at her, his face torn between rage and confusion. The trust that had been so carefully, fragilely built between them was shattering. But before he could speak, another sound cut through the night. The sound of hoofbeats, approaching fast. They both froze, turning to look back towards the ranch house. Two riders were galloping across the pasture, dark silhouettes against the moonlit hills. It's Morton, Wade snarled, his hand instinctively going to the pistol at his belt. He must have seen the light. The riders reined in their horses a dozen yards away. The larger of the two men swung down from his saddle. He was big, imposing, with a cruel sneer on his face that was visible even in the dim light. Silas Morton. Well, well, Langston, Morton's voice boomed across the field, dripping with mock surprise. Doing a little late-night gardening? What have you got there? Digging for buried treasure? His gaze fell on the open grave, the skeletal remains, and the locket still in Wade's hand. A slow, ugly smile spread across his face. Ah, he said. I see you found him. Took you long enough. Wade's body went rigid. You knew, he said, his voice dangerously low. You knew he was here. Of course I knew, Morton sneered. I paid the poor bastard to come here. Gave him a bottle of whiskey and a blanket teeming with pestilence. Told him to camp by your well. Easiest $1,000 I ever spent. The casual confession, the sheer evil of it hung in the air. Wade let out a roar of pure animal rage and lunged forward, but Morton was ready. He drew his own pistol with lightning speed. Ah, he said, leveling the gun at Wade's chest. Let's not be hasty. We have things to discuss. He glanced at Ruthie, his eyes lingering on her face. And it seems you've brought a friend, another pretty Forrester woman. They seem to flock to this cursed place, don't they? Ruthie felt a cold dread wash over her. He knew who she was. What do you want, Morton? Wade spat, his hands clenched into fists. What I've always wanted, Morton said, his voice dropping into a hateful hiss. Everything you have, this ranch, your reputation, your life. You came back from the war a hero. You stole Elizabeth from me. You took everything that should have been mine. Elizabeth never wanted you, Wade roared. She would have learned to, Morton shot back. But then your precious honor got in the way. But I'm a patient man. I found a weakness. Her pathetic, blackmailing cousin Daniel. It was so easy to use him. And when he got greedy, well, accidents happen. You killed him, Ruthie whispered, horrified. Morton laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. The fool got careless. He threatened to expose me along with Elizabeth's dirty little secrets if I didn't give him a bigger cut of her payments. So I followed him out here after he'd collected his last payment from her. A knife in the back, and into the ground he went. Pete, your loyal dog, found him a few weeks later and saved me the trouble of a proper burial. He thought it was a drifter. Perfect. The pieces were all slotting together. Daniel blackmailed Elizabeth. Morton used Daniel to torture her. Then Morton killed Daniel to silence him. And then after Elizabeth's death, he sent the sick man to the well to kill her son, to wipe the slate clean, to remove every last trace of the family he hated. It was a web of evil, spun over years, all leading to this moment. "It's over, Morton," Wade said, his voice now eerily calm. "You've confessed. You're finished." Morton just laughed again. "Confessed? To who? To you? To a lying little tramp who's probably in on it with you? Who's going to believe you? No, Langston, here's what's going to happen. My man here," he gestured to the other rider, who had also drawn his gun, "he's going to be my witness. He's going to see you, mad with grief, attack me. I'll be forced to defend myself. And this little lady, well, it's a tragedy. She'll be caught in the crossfire. A witness nobody will ever hear from." He was going to kill them both, right here, and bury them next to the man he'd murdered years ago. "You won't get away with this," Ruthie said, her fear turning to cold anger. "Oh, I think I will," Morton sneered. "This ranch will be mine by the end of the month, and your family's dirty secret will die with you." "What secret?" Wade growled, looking from Morton to Ruthie. "What is he talking about?" Morton's eyes gleamed with malice. He was savoring this moment. "You never knew, did you, hero? You thought you married a pure, perfect lady. You never knew what she really was." "Shut up, Morton," Wade warned, taking a half-step forward. "Don't you want to know?" Morton taunted. "Don't you want to know the real reason she was paying her cousin to keep quiet? It wasn't just some old family business scandal. It was much more personal than that." He paused, letting the poison sink in. "Your son, Langston," Morton whispered, the words twisting like a knife. "Your precious Tommy, he wasn't yours." The world stopped. The crickets went silent. The wind died. All Ruthie could hear was the blood roaring in her ears. Wade just stared, his face blank, uncomprehending. "Liar," he breathed. "Am I?" Morton's smile was triumphant, demonic. "Ask her. Ask your little housekeeper. The Forresters stick together, don't they? It was the family's greatest shame. Elizabeth was assaulted, back in St. Louis, long before she met you. A scandal that was buried and hidden. The boy was the result of that. He wasn't your son, Wade. He was her shame. And now you can share it with her in the afterlife." He raised his pistol, taking aim at Wade's heart. "No!" Ruthie screamed. In that split second, everything happened at once. Ruthie, acting on pure instinct, kicked the lantern over. It smashed against a rock, spilling burning oil onto the dry grass. Flames erupted, a sudden wall of fire and smoke between them and Morton. Wade didn't hesitate. He wasn't the grieving ghost anymore. He was the soldier. He dove to the side as Morton's gun fired, the bullet whistling through the space where he had been standing. The second rider, startled by the fire, turned his horse. That's when a shot rang out from the darkness behind him. The man grunted and slumped forward in his saddle, his horse bolting into the night. Old Pete. He had followed them. He stepped out from behind a cluster of rocks, an old rifle in his hands, his face grim. Morton, enraged, spun around, firing wildly into the smoke and flames. "You can't hide, Langston!" But Wade wasn't hiding. He was circling. He used the fire and smoke as cover, moving silently through the darkness, a predator in his own territory. Ruthie scrambled backwards, her mind reeling from Morton's final venomous revelation. Tommy, not Wade's son. It couldn't be true. It was just another lie, another piece of poison from a dying snake. Morton was reloading, his back to the open grave. That's when Wade emerged from the smoke behind him, silent as a wraith. He didn't have his gun, he had the shovel. He swung it like a club, a single powerful arc. It connected with the back of Morton's head with a sickening crack. Morton's eyes went wide with shock, and he crumpled to the ground without a sound, falling half into the grave he had forced them to dig. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the spreading fire. Wade stood over Morton's body, heaving, the shovel still in his hand. Pete rushed to stamp out the flames, his face pale but resolute. Ruthie just sat on the ground, staring at Wade, her heart breaking for him. He had found justice for his family, but at what cost? Morton's final words were a poison that could never be taken back. Wade slowly turned to look at her. The killing rage was gone from his eyes, replaced by a pain so deep it was bottomless. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice a shattered whisper. Ruthie looked at the man she had come to care for, the man who had suffered so much. She thought of the love he had for the boy, the wooden horse, the way his face softened when he spoke Tommy's name. Blood didn't make a father. Love did. She looked him straight in the eye, and she lied. "No," she said, her voice clear and strong. "It's not true. He was a liar and a monster. He said it to hurt you, to destroy the memory of your son. Don't let him win." She saw the conflict in his eyes, the desperate need to believe her. She walked over to the grave. She looked down at the body of her uncle, Daniel Forrester. Then she looked at the locket, still lying in the dirt. Before Wade could stop her, she picked it up and threw it into the heart of the dying flames. Let the secrets burn. Let them turn to ash. Wade watched the locket disappear. He looked from the fire to Morton's body, then to Ruthie. He walked over to her, and for the first time he reached out and took her hand. His grip was firm, grounding. "Thank you," he whispered. And she knew he wasn't just thanking her for the lie. He was thanking her for giving him back his son, for giving him back his love, untainted. The sheriff arrived with a posse not long after, alerted by the gunshot Pete had fired. The story they told was the truth, just not the whole truth. Morton and his hired gun had ambushed them. There was a struggle. Morton had confessed to murdering the drifter years ago, the man responsible for the fever that killed Tommy. It was self-defense. With Morton's reputation and Pete as a witness, no one questioned it. Justice, in the eyes of the law, was served. Silas Morton, the snake, was dead. The threat to Blackbriar Ranch was over. In the weeks that followed, the last of the shadows lifted from the ranch. Wade was a different man. The silence in the house was replaced by conversation. The grief was still there, a part of him always, but it no longer defined him. It was a scar, not an open wound. One afternoon, Ruthie came downstairs to find him standing in the hallway. The door to the nursery was open. She stopped, her heart catching in her throat. He had opened the door. He turned to her, a small, sad smile on his face. "It's time," he said. "It's time to let the light in." Together they cleaned the room. They packed away the tiny clothes and the picture books, not to hide them, but to preserve them. Wade polished the little wooden horse until it shone, and he placed it on the mantelpiece in the main parlor, right where a picture should have been, a memorial to a love that was real, no matter the truth. Life returned to Blackbriar Ranch. Laughter was heard. Friends like Sarah and Pete were welcomed for Sunday dinners. The house filled with the smells of baking bread and apple pie from recipes in a well-worn book. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the hills, Wade turned to Ruthie. "You know," he said quietly, "it doesn't matter." Ruthie looked at him, confused. "What doesn't matter?" "What Morton said," he confessed, his gaze steady on hers. "I've thought about it a lot. Maybe it was true. Maybe it wasn't. But it doesn't matter. I loved him. He was my son. That's the only truth that counts." Tears welled in Ruthie's eyes. He had found his own truth. He had healed himself. "You saved me, Ruthie Bell Carter," he said, taking her hand. "You walked into my darkness and you weren't afraid. You brought this house back to life. You brought me back to life." "We saved each other," she whispered. In the dusty town of Cedar Falls, the job posting for Blackbriar Ranch was finally taken down. The story of what happened out there became a local legend, a story of grief, evil, and justice. But for the man and woman living there, it was simpler than that. It was a love story, born from tragedy, built on secrets, but ultimately forged in truth. Two broken souls who found a way to mend each other, creating a new life, a new family, in the one place no one else dared to go. They found their home. Stories like this remind us that even in the darkest of times, there's always a glimmer of hope, a chance for a new beginning. The human spirit is a powerful thing. If you enjoyed this story, and you believe in the power of hope and second chances, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. You're not just a viewer, you're part of this community. And I've got a story for you tomorrow that you absolutely will not want to miss. Thanks for listening.